Forget what you've seen in documentaries. Forget the penguins, the icebreakers, the smiling scientists holding snow samples like trophies. None of that matters here. This isn't the Antarctica they show you. This is the one that exists when the satellites stop panning, when the last expedition logs go missing, and when the ice starts whispering back. You're looking at your screen, just another night, just another rabbit hole. The map glows cold and sterile, like a surgical lamp over the planet's open wound. Your cursor drifts south, past the green and blue, into white. The shape of the world frays at the edges, and there it is. The frozen continent, so vast it could swallow Europe twice and still have room for your curiosity. You zoom in. Google Earth stutters. The image freezes for a moment, as if the software itself is reluctant to show you more. And then it resolves. Endless ice plains, rippled like scar tissue. Glacial ridges like the ribs of something ancient buried beneath. Most people would stop here. You don't. There's something about this place that feels wrong. Not bad weather, wrong, but wrong in a geological way, as if the Earth itself has tried to erase a chapter and didn't do a very good job. The shapes beneath the snow seem too deliberate. Sharp corners, lines that meet at perfect right angles. Nature loves chaos. This looks suspiciously like design. You tell yourself it's nothing. Compression artifacts, glitches, pareidolia. But your mind, being the inconvenient machine that it is, starts making connections anyway. The perfect hexagonal crater near the Shackleton Range. The rectangular shadow cast by Mount Sidley. The smooth depression that looks a little too much like the outline of a roof. And beneath all that ice, 2 miles thick in places, radar scans have picked up voids. Hollow spaces. Caves that shouldn't exist. Tunnels that stretch for miles. Congrats. You've just joined the club of people who can't sleep anymore. They call it the last frontier, but that's misleading. A frontier implies discovery, adventure, courage. Antarctica isn't interested in any of that. It doesn't want to be discovered. Officially, of course, there's nothing unusual here. Just glaciers doing glacial things. The Antarctic Treaty keeps the place locked down tighter than a billionaire's conscience. No mining, no military, no permanent settlements. The world's most powerful nations, all suddenly in agreement about something. That alone should make you suspicious. You scroll a little further. There's a blurry patch near the Queen Maud Mountains, where the resolution drops inexplicably, as if someone intentionally smeared Vaseline across the lens. You adjust the tilt. The shapes come into view again. Geometric mounds, evenly spaced. One might call them pyramidal, if one were feeling particularly blasphemous toward science. Of course, you're not saying they're pyramids. You're just saying they look a lot like them. The rational voice in your head protests. It mutters about ice accumulation, wind erosion, optical illusions. But another voice, quieter, older, whispers that maybe, just maybe, the ice is hiding something it was never supposed to. And if that's true, then what kind of civilization could have lived here, before the world froze over? You zoom out again. The scale is disorienting. It's not just a continent, it's a tomb the size of a continent. If there are ruins buried below, they've been entombed for at least 12,000 years, since the end of the last ice age. Long enough for history to forget. Long enough for us to start over and call ourselves the first. The irony, of course, is that we still call this place uninhabitable. But everything was uninhabitable once, until someone decided it wasn't. Maybe they came here when it was green, when Antarctica wasn't a wasteland but a lush refuge, teeming with forests and rivers. Geological records suggest that once it was. Temperate, even tropical in parts. A paradise before the poles shifted and the world tilted just enough to turn it to ice. What if they built something here? What if they left something behind? And what if, beneath all that frozen silence, it's still there, waiting for the thaw? You take one last look at the glowing map on your screen. Just white, endless white. And beneath it, the possibility that everything we know about human history might be missing its first chapter. Now, let's see what else they forgot to tell you about Antarctica. You start noticing patterns. That's usually how it begins, not with discovery, but with doubt. You drag the map slightly east, and there it is again. A strange ridge, perfectly symmetrical. From a distance, it looks like a trick of light, the way sunlight falls unevenly on ice. But when you tilt the view, the angle shifts and the outline remains. Straight lines. Clean edges. Corners sharp enough to draw blood. Nature, as far as you remember from science class, doesn't do corners. Not like this. Mountains crumble, glaciers flow, rocks fracture. They don't build in 90-degree angles. And yet, here you are, staring at something that looks suspiciously like architecture. It's fine, you tell yourself. Ice does weird things. But the longer you stare, the more it doesn't look weird. It looks intentional. You zoom closer. The surface detail pixelates into a mess of white and gray, a digital snowstorm. Still, beneath the distortion, there's a faint grid pattern. Faint, but there. The kind of thing you might expect from old walls, or perhaps the foundations of something larger. You glance at the coordinates. You copy them down. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Forums exist for this sort of thing, where people post blurry screenshots of satellite images and whisper about ancient cities entombed under 2 miles of ice. Some claim to see entrances to tunnels, others claim to see landing pads. Someone even marked out what they swear is a massive circular hatch, half buried under the snow like the lid of a forgotten vault. You scroll through their screenshots. Most look fake, some are laughable, but a few make your stomach tighten. There's one formation, a perfect triangle of exposed rock jutting out from the ice shelf. 3 sides, smooth and precise. The kind of geometry that makes mathematicians happy and geologists nervous. They call it the Antarctic Pyramid, because of course they do. The official explanation? Natural mountain formation. The unofficial one? Well, that depends on how much coffee you've had and how late it is. You imagine it for a moment. An ancient structure, buried for tens of thousands of years, its tip just barely visible through the frozen crust. If the rest lies beneath, then what's hidden below could dwarf anything we've ever built. And suddenly your cursor hovers, hesitant. You zoom out again, tracing the surrounding landscape. To the west, another similar peak. Then another. 3 points forming a line, almost equidistant. You remember that ancient civilizations had a weird obsession with aligning things. Pyramids with stars, temples with solstices. Coincidence? Maybe. But coincidence starts to feel thin when geometry keeps showing up in the middle of nowhere. You take a deep breath. It's easy to get carried away. Pattern seeking is a human hobby, after all. We see faces in toast and gods in clouds. But still, toast and clouds don't cast perfect shadows at high noon. You lean closer to the screen, as if distance could help you understand. Every time you think you've found something extraordinary, your rational mind rushes in to play referee. Ice melts, refreezes, and fractures, it says. That's all. And yet, you can't quite silence the other voice, the one that whispers, but what if it isn't? Spoiler alert, it's never that simple. Because the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. A long, sinuous trench runs for miles under the ice near Ellsworth Land. A dark line that cuts through the snow like a scar. It could be a natural fissure, sure, but its edges look almost machined. Straight as a runway. Then there's the anomaly near Wilkes Land, a circular depression nearly 200 miles across. Some say it's a crater. Others say it's something else entirely. The structure, maybe. The dome. A remnant of something massive, ancient, and deliberately buried. You find yourself zooming out again, your mind quietly unraveling. What if these aren't isolated features? What if the ice itself is a shroud, and these glimpses, these lines and ridges, are the outlines of a civilization entombed beneath? You tell yourself you're only speculating. It's harmless. It's just pixels on a screen. But the thought lingers, like frostbite in the mind. After all, if these shapes really are natural, why do they look so much like the ones we've built? You close the map. For a moment, the room feels colder than it should. The screen fades to black, but the shapes remain burned behind your eyelids. Perfect lines in an imperfect world. Congrats. You've just made Antarctica personal. And the night's only getting darker. You start to wonder what this place looked like before it froze to death. It's hard to imagine it now, the cold, the endless white, but once upon a time, Antarctica was alive. Not just with penguins and the occasional seal, but with forests. Real ones. Picture it, rivers winding through valleys, ferns taller than people, and air so warm and damp it would fog your lungs. Sunlight dripping through canopies of ancient trees. The ground soft not from snow, but from moss and soil. That was Antarctica, 50 million years ago, give or take a few million. Long before the first humans set foot anywhere. Long before we even learned how to ruin things properly. You scroll through old paleoclimate maps. They show the continent drifting, slowly, lazily, away from the warmth of the equator. It didn't freeze right away. It took its time. Maybe that's the cruelest part. Imagine centuries of slow dying, the trees shrinking, the rain turning to sleet, the rivers stiffening into glass. Imagine standing in that forest as the last leaves fell, knowing the world would never be warm again. And here's the strange part. Fossils prove that plants and even small animals thrived here once. Leaves found under ice layers, so well preserved they still have their veins. Scientists talk about them with awe, the way archaeologists talk about relics from a lost religion. Of course, science has its explanations. Climate shifts, continental drift, the usual suspects. But the part that keeps conspiracy theorists awake at night is what those explanations don't say. If this place was once green, lush, habitable, then why not inhabited? Maybe not by us, exactly. Maybe by something older. Something that didn't need Wi-Fi or plumbing or excuses. Something that saw the world as it was before history started keeping score. You imagine that civilization now, buried beneath the ice. Their temples swallowed, their roads pulverized, their monuments sealed under miles of frozen time. Maybe they left records, carvings, symbols, warnings. Or maybe they didn't bother. Maybe they knew the next tenants wouldn't understand them anyway. Spoiler alert, we still don't. Every now and then, explorers find something they can't quite explain. A fossilized root system where it shouldn't be, a warm patch under the ice, a radar echo that looks a little too structured. The official line calls them anomalies. Nature being playful. But when nature starts sketching blueprints underground, you start to wonder who's really playing. You lean back in your chair. The thought hits you. If Antarctica used to be warm, then maybe the ice isn't just a natural tragedy. Maybe it's a reset. A great freeze to wipe the slate clean. Civilizations rise, fall, and vanish. Ours will too, eventually. But the ice doesn't forget. It keeps everything, the bones, the metal, the evidence, neatly filed away in permafrost. You picture it melting someday. Not soon, but soon enough. The climate shifts again, the glaciers retreat, and the continent starts to breathe. What happens then? What emerges when 12,000 years of silence begin to thaw? The idea is almost poetic, if poetry weren't so depressing. And there's the irony. We call Antarctica a wilderness, as if it's untouched. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's the most touched place of all. Layer after layer of forgotten worlds, each buried by the next, until we came along and decided the story started with us. It's comforting, in a bleak way, to think we might not be the first civilization to vanish. Just another line on the timeline, waiting to be covered up by whatever comes next. The ice stretches endlessly on your screen. Blank, beautiful, and utterly indifferent. Somewhere under all that silence, the memory of forests still lingers. Tree roots turn to fossils, rivers frozen midstream, and maybe, if you believe the whispers, the ruins of something built by hands older than ours. But that's a thought for later. For now, you just sit there, the glow of the monitor painting your face pale, and wonder how many times the world has died before and how many times it will again. Congrats! You've reached the part of the story where the Earth starts keeping secrets. And it only gets colder from here. You've been staring at the surface long enough. It's time to go underneath. Because whatever is visible above the snow, the ridges, the pyramids, the suspicious shadows, is only the tip of something much bigger. The real secrets of Antarctica aren't on top. They're buried deep below, where no sunlight has touched in millions of years. Let's start with what's real. Beneath the continent's ice sheet lies a labyrinth of tunnels, valleys, and liquid lakes sealed off from the surface since before humans existed. The biggest of them, Lake Vostok, sits 2 miles beneath the ice and is roughly the size of Lake Ontario. Perfectly preserved, untouched by the modern world. A time capsule of alien biology frozen on our own planet. Scientists drilled down into it once. Took them years. When they finally breached the lake's upper layers, strange microbes surfaced, organisms no one had ever seen before. Life that had evolved in complete darkness, cut off from the rest of the biosphere for possibly 15 million years. The official report called them extremophiles. That's science's polite way of saying, we have no idea what these things are, but please don't panic. Of course, that's just what we know. And it's what we don't know that makes your imagination start pacing. Radar scans of the continent have shown anomalies, vast hollows under the ice, linear tunnels that stretch for miles, massive dome-shaped voids that echo like cathedrals. The official explanation says ice deformation. Because apparently, ice deforms in perfectly straight, parallel corridors now. Congrats, Antarctica. You've upgraded from frozen desert to cosmic mystery. You lean in reading old expedition notes, the kind that never make it into glossy documentaries. Reports of warm caverns deep underground, where geothermal heat keeps water liquid and air breathable. Scientists describe temperatures that shouldn't exist, places where a person could, theoretically, survive without freezing. Some theories go further, much further. They talk about entire ecosystems trapped beneath the ice. Forests, even. Strange species adapting to the permanent dark. The more imaginative versions throw in lost cities, underground bases, or remnants of civilizations that refuse to die with the surface world. You can laugh. You probably should. But the uncomfortable truth is that parts of those ideas aren't entirely impossible. Earth's crust is unpredictable. Heat seeps up from below. Water carves paths where you least expect. And when you add millions of years of shifting ice and pressure, well, let's just say, if there were tunnels down there, we probably wouldn't find them until it's far too late to ask who built them. And then there's the hollow Earth theory, the godfather of all Antarctic conspiracies. The claim that there are vast openings at the poles, gateways leading into a massive inner world hidden beneath Earth's crust. You've probably seen the maps, hand-drawn in the 1940s, full of arrows and secret entrances. They say the Nazis believed in it too, and that's never a comforting sign. But here's the funny part, even absurd ideas sometimes start with real data. Old satellite photos do show temperature anomalies, warm spots where the ice should be coldest. Some pilots have reported magnetic disturbances near the South Pole. Compasses spinning, instruments glitching. Officially? Equipment failure. Unofficially? Nobody likes to talk about it. You scroll further, down a forum thread buried deep in the internet's basement. Someone has posted images of supposed entrances, black ovals on the ice, big enough to swallow a plane. The coordinates are always conveniently censored. The comments section is a mix of awe, paranoia, and sarcasm. Someone writes, if there's a hidden world down there, at least they have better insulation. And yet, you pause on one particular image. It looks like a fissure, maybe a cave mouth, maybe nothing. But the edges are too clean, the symmetry too deliberate. It could be an illusion, or a reminder that the Earth still has a sense of humor. You close your tabs. You tell yourself you don't believe any of it. Then you remember Lake Vostok again. A massive, warm, liquid lake under 2 miles of ice, teeming with unknown life. And you realize that sometimes, truth doesn't need conspiracy. It's unsettling enough on its own. The ice isn't just frozen water. It's a curtain. And curtains are meant to be drawn back eventually. You glance once more at that glowing, empty map. The surface feels thinner now, like glass between you and something breathing on the other side. So go ahead. Keep scrolling. Keep zooming. Because the deeper you look, the more you'll wish you hadn't. You've seen the satellite images, the strange ridges, the impossible tunnels. Now you start to wonder, how much did people already know? Because here's where things get weird. Long before Antarctica was officially discovered, people were already drawing it. Take the Piri Reis map. drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who definitely didn't have access to Google Earth. It's one of those artifacts that refuses to behave. The map shows the coastlines of South America, Africa, and then, down at the bottom, a strange landmass, accurately shaped, unmistakably positioned where Antarctica should be. The catch? Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820. So either Pyrie Reis had a really good imagination, or someone before him had already charted that icy shore. Historians, of course, have explanations. They'll tell you the lower section might just be an exaggerated extension of South America, that the resemblance is coincidental, that early mapmakers were prone to creative flair. And sure, maybe he was just doodling, but the coastline on his map isn't just shaped right. It's drawn without ice. That's the part nobody likes to linger on. If the map really does depict an ice-free Antarctica, it means whoever made the original charts, the ones Pyrie Reis copied from, saw the continent before it froze, which would mean they existed tens of thousands of years before modern civilization, which would mean we are, once again, the new kids in a very old neighborhood. Congrats! You're now questioning every history book you've ever read. And it doesn't stop there. The Orontius Phineas map, drawn in 1531, shows the same thing: Antarctica's coastline, detailed, ice-free, with rivers and mountain ranges that align eerily well with modern geological surveys. When researchers later compared it to satellite radar scans, the match was uncomfortably close. Officially, these are coincidences. Unofficially, it feels like the past is trying to tell us we've been here before. But if that's true, who were these early cartographers? Prehistoric explorers? Survivors of some forgotten civilization? Visitors from somewhere else entirely? The theories multiply like frost on glass. Beautiful, fragile, impossible to hold. And then, centuries later, came the actual expeditions. Early explorers who set sail for the southern unknown came back with frostbite, madness, or not at all. Captain Cook circled Antarctica in the 1770s but never reached it. He spoke of endless walls of ice, as if the continent itself didn't want company. Others tried after him. Sealing ships vanished without a trace. Their last coordinates often point to places now marked as restricted zones. Strange, isn't it? By the early 1900s, Antarctica became a kind of obsession, the last blank spot on Earth. Men like Shackleton and Scott risked everything to plant a flag in a place that clearly didn't care. They wrote about mirages, ghostly shapes in the distance, lights that moved across the sky. The official term was polar mirage. The unofficial one was whatever it was that shouldn't have been there. Of course, exploration is messy. Humans see what they want to see, especially when freezing to death. Still, the coincidences pile up like snowdrifts. You think about those maps again, ancient, ink-stained reminders that maybe the first explorers weren't European at all. Maybe they were something else. Something with a longer memory and better ships. And then, of course, came the 20th century, radar, satellites, classified surveys. Antarctica mapped not by men in parkas, but by machines in orbit. The technology changed. The secrecy didn't. Large sections of the continent remained censored on public satellite data, pixelated, blurred, or conveniently covered by clouds. The technical glitch, they say. But glitches don't last decades. Some whisper that modern governments have found things down there, relics, structures, evidence, and agreed to keep quiet. After all, nothing unites nations faster than the need to hide something they can't explain. You zoom out from the digital globe again. The bottom of the planet glows blank and perfect, as if the world itself has hit erase. It's ironic, really. We call these early explorers brave for venturing into the unknown, but the unknown never asked to be found. Maybe Antarctica isn't just the last blank spot on the map. Maybe it's the only place that remembers what the map used to look like. At some point, you start to notice a pattern. Every mystery worth asking about eventually runs into a locked door. And Antarctica's locked tighter than anywhere else on Earth. Officially, it's all very noble. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, ratified by every major power, declares that this entire continent belongs to no one. It's a place for science, peace, and international cooperation. Beautiful words. The kind of words that sound like they're hiding something. Under the treaty, no one can claim land here. No military bases. No mining. No permanent settlements. No nuclear anything. It's the world's only continent where war, industry, and profit are technically illegal. You almost want to believe that. A place untouched by greed, politics, or conquest. How inspiring. Except, of course, for the part where humans never agree on anything except this. Think about it. During the Cold War, while the US and the Soviet Union were circling each other with nuclear weapons, they somehow found time to sit down and agree, let's keep this one frozen. It's like two arsonists deciding to share a fire extinguisher. The treaty came just a few years after a sudden surge of interest in Antarctica, strange expeditions, radar mapping, military flyovers, and the rapid closing of public access. Then, as if on cue, the doors slammed shut. Today, you can visit Antarctica, technically, as a tourist. You'll see penguins, glaciers, maybe a research station if you're lucky. But your path is mapped, your movements tracked, and every location worth exploring is conveniently off-limits. Restricted zones. No-fly corridors. Environmental protection areas. Because nothing says conservation like absolute secrecy. You can't bring drones. You can't stray from the tour route. You can't explore the places with names like Dome Sea, Queen Maud Land, or the area near the South Pole itself, the one every country seems to pretend doesn't exist. You tell yourself it's for science, for safety, but you can't help noticing how quickly people stop asking questions. Congrats, you've reached the part of the story where the silence starts to feel coordinated. And that's the strange thing about this treaty. It's one of the longest-standing international agreements in history. It's lasted through wars, revolutions, the fall of empires. No other accord has survived that long without someone breaking it. Apparently, Antarctica is the one thing humans can share without a fight. Sure. And penguins write the paperwork. The deeper you look, the more absurd it gets. Nearly every major power maintains research stations, but many of them have military infrastructure, communication arrays, power plants, satellite uplinks. One Russian station, Vostok, sits directly above a massive subglacial lake. Pure coincidence, obviously. Meanwhile, countries that can't agree on anything else somehow manage to keep their Antarctic data classified. Even radar scans, the ones that could show what's under the ice, are heavily restricted. You'll find press releases, colorful infographics, but not the raw files. The official explanation? Too complex for public interpretation. Which is bureaucratic for, we'd rather you didn't look too closely. Some people say the treaty isn't just about protecting nature. It's about protecting what's under nature. The idea being, if you can't dig, drill, or explore freely, you can't stumble on something inconvenient. Like the remains of a city, or a machine, or a truth no one's ready to process. You picture it, a handful of powerful nations, sitting in a smoke-filled room, nodding in quiet agreement. Let's keep it buried. You laugh at the thought. It sounds ridiculous. Paranoid. And yet, when's the last time every superpower agreed on anything else? The treaty is still in force today. Still unbroken. Still sacred. Antarctica remains the common heritage of mankind. Which is a poetic way of saying, don't touch. The wind howls over the ice. The camera pans across the endless white, empty but not innocent. Somewhere out there, under 2 miles of frozen time, is whatever they didn't want found. And maybe that's why the treaty holds so perfectly. Because some doors, once opened, don't close again. So the world agreed, better to keep it locked. Better to keep it quiet. Better to let Antarctica stay what it's always been. A secret too big for one lifetime to carry. At some point, you start to notice a pattern. Every mystery worth asking about eventually runs into a locked door. And Antarctica's locked tighter than anywhere else on Earth. Officially, it's all very noble. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, ratified by every major power, declares that this entire continent belongs to no one. It's a place for science, peace, and international cooperation. Beautiful words. The kind of words that sound like they're hiding something. Under the treaty, no one can claim land here. No military bases. No mining. No permanent settlements. No nuclear anything. It's the world's only continent where war, industry, and profit are technically illegal. You almost want to believe that. A place untouched by greed, politics, or conquest. How inspiring. Except, of course, for the part where humans never agree on anything except this. Think about it. During the Cold War, while the US and the Soviet Union were circling each other with nuclear weapons, they somehow found time to sit down and agree, let's keep this one frozen. It's like two arsonists deciding to share a fire extinguisher. The treaty came just a few years after a sudden surge of interest in Antarctica, strange expeditions, radar mapping, military flyovers, and the rapid closing of public access. Then, as if on cue, the doors slammed shut. Today, you can visit Antarctica, technically, as a tourist. You'll see penguins, glaciers, maybe a research station if you're lucky. But your path is mapped, your movements tracked, and every location worth exploring is conveniently off-limits. Restricted zones. No-fly corridors. Environmental protection areas. Because nothing says conservation like absolute secrecy. You can't bring drones. You can't stray from the tour route. You can't explore the places with names like Dome Sea, Queen Maud Land, or the area near the South Pole itself, the one every country seems to pretend doesn't exist. You tell yourself it's for science, for safety, but you can't help noticing how quickly people stop asking questions. Congrats, you've reached the part of the story where the silence starts to feel coordinated. And that's the strange thing about this treaty, it's one of the longest-standing international agreements in history. It's lasted through wars, revolutions, the fall of empires. No other accord has survived that long without someone breaking it. Apparently, Antarctica is the one thing humans can share without a fight. Sure. And penguins write the paperwork. The deeper you look, the more absurd it gets. Nearly every major power maintains research stations, but many of them have military infrastructure, communication arrays, power plants, satellite uplinks. One Russian station, Vostok, sits directly above a massive subglacial lake. Pure coincidence, obviously. Meanwhile, countries that can't agree on anything else somehow manage to keep their Antarctic data classified. Even radar scans, the ones that could show what's under the ice, are heavily restricted. You'll find press releases, colorful infographics, but not the raw files. The official explanation? Too complex for public interpretation. Which is bureaucratic for, we'd rather you didn't look too closely. Some people say the treaty isn't just about protecting nature. It's about protecting what's under nature. The idea being, if you can't dig, drill, or explore freely, you can't stumble on something inconvenient. Like the remains of a city, or a machine, or a truth no one's ready to process. You picture it, a handful of powerful nations, sitting in a smoke-filled room, nodding in quiet agreement. Let's keep it buried. You laugh at the thought. It sounds ridiculous. Paranoid. And yet, when's the last time every superpower agreed on anything else? The treaty is still in force today. Still unbroken. Still sacred. Antarctica remains the common heritage of mankind. Which is a poetic way of saying, don't touch. The wind howls over the ice. The camera pans across the endless white, empty but not innocent. Somewhere out there, under 2 miles of frozen time, is whatever they didn't want found. And maybe that's why the treaty holds so perfectly. Because some doors, once opened, don't close again. So the world agreed, better to keep it locked. Better to keep it quiet. Better to let Antarctica stay what it's always been. A secret too big for one lifetime to carry. Every good mystery has a moment where things stop adding up. For Antarctica, that moment was called Operation High Jump. The year was 1946. World War II had just ended, and the world was busy pretending it could go back to normal. But before the snow had even melted on Europe's ruins, the United States decided to send the largest expedition ever assembled to Antarctica. Officially, it was a scientific mission. Unofficially, it looked suspiciously like a small invasion. 13 ships, 33 aircraft, over 4,000 military personnel. all heading to a continent covered in ice, with no enemies, no inhabitants, and no reason to invade. You'd think someone would have asked questions. But this was the 1940s, when "don't ask" was practically a national motto. The mission was led by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, a decorated explorer and media darling. Byrd had already flown over both poles and had a knack for dramatic statements. He called the mission Operation High Jump, because if you're going to freeze in the middle of nowhere, you might as well have a catchy name. Official goals: establish an American presence, test equipment in extreme conditions, and train for potential polar warfare. Potential polar warfare. Because apparently, someone thought the next big fight might happen against penguins. Anyway, the operation began in late 1946. The ships set sail, the planes took off, and for a few months everything went according to plan. Then, just as quickly, it didn't. Byrd's expedition was supposed to last 6 to 8 months. Instead, it ended in just 8 weeks. No explanation. No public debrief. Mission over. Pack up, go home. When reporters asked why, officials mumbled about unexpected weather conditions and logistical challenges. Because who could have guessed Antarctica might be cold? Rumors started almost immediately. Some said Byrd's planes had encountered hostile forces. Others claimed there were losses, planes that vanished, crews unaccounted for, stories of strange lights and impossible speeds. Official records mention a few accidents, a handful of fatalities, not unusual for such an expedition. But the survivors' testimonies, the few that exist, don't read like normal reports. They talk about aircraft emerging from the sea, about radar interference, about sudden, blinding encounters. You tell yourself it's exaggeration. War pilots with frayed nerves and too much adrenaline. And yet, Admiral Byrd himself added fuel to the fire. In a 1947 interview with a Chilean newspaper, Byrd was quoted saying something peculiar. The United States should be prepared to face the possibility of enemy aircraft that can fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Now, maybe he meant Soviet bombers. Maybe he was being dramatic. Or maybe he saw something he wasn't supposed to. Either way, Operation High Jump remains one of the strangest episodes in modern exploration. A military-scale operation that began loudly and ended quietly, sealed under layers of official paperwork and polite shrugs. After the expedition, Byrd continued his polar career, briefly. By the 1950s, his tone had changed. He stopped giving interviews about Antarctica. When he returned there for Operation Deep Freeze, a few years later, the media coverage was sanitized, almost rehearsed. Every reference to danger or anomaly disappeared. It's easy to dismiss the rumors. It's harder to explain why a peacetime navy sent a fleet to the end of the earth, came back early, and never really talked about it again. Theories, of course, thrive in silence. Some say High Jump was investigating Nazi activity, remnants of a secret base in Queen Maud Land. Others claim it was reconnaissance for underground anomalies discovered during early radar scans. And the more ambitious theories? They say the expedition stumbled upon something entirely non-human. Whatever it was, it changed how the world treated Antarctica. Within a decade, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, sealing the continent under an unprecedented agreement of neutrality. Coincidence? Maybe. But history rarely bothers with coincidences that convenient. You close the folder, your fingers cold even in the warmth of your room. The operation's name lingers, High Jump. It sounds almost symbolic now. A leap into the unknown, followed by a quick retreat. What they saw down there, if they saw anything at all, never made it into the official reports. But you can feel it in the silence between the lines. They went looking for ice and found something else entirely. And whatever it was, it made the most powerful navy in the world turn back. By now, you've probably noticed something strange about Antarctica. It attracts the kind of stories that make historians sweat and conspiracy theorists smile. And few tales are colder, darker, or more stubborn than the myth of the Nazi base under the ice. They called it Base 211. Allegedly hidden somewhere in Queen Maud Land, carved into mountains and shielded by glaciers. A fortress of steel and secrecy at the edge of the world. The story goes like this. Near the end of World War II, as Berlin fell and the Reich crumbled, a small contingent of Nazis fled south, not north, not to Argentina, but all the way to Antarctica. They supposedly brought with them scientists, engineers, and something even stranger, technology no one was supposed to have. You laugh, of course. It sounds absurd. Nazis in Antarctica? What's next? Penguins in SS uniforms? And yet, the rumor won't die. It begins, as most legends do, with just enough truth to stay alive. In 1938, Nazi Germany did send an official expedition to Antarctica. The Schwabenland expedition, led by Alfred Richer. It wasn't small, either. A specially outfitted ship, aircraft for aerial mapping, thousands of photographs, and a clear agenda, to claim territory for the Reich. They called it New Schwabenland, New Swabia. And they planted flags, dropped markers, even mapped a region that now sits eerily close to where later theories would place Base 211. Officially, they were there to scout for whaling grounds and resources. Unofficially, no one really knows what they found. The records that survived the war are incomplete, some conveniently missing, others classified. After 1945, whispers began. That submarines, U-boats, had vanished in the South Atlantic. That ships had left Germany late in the war carrying special cargo. That strange objects were seen near the ice. One Argentine naval report even documented a U-boat surrendering months after the war's end, claiming to have come from southern waters. What they were doing there, no one could say. Of course, the easy explanation is, it's all fiction. Post-war paranoia. Cold War propaganda. The fever dream of people who couldn't accept that evil can die as easily as it began. But then there's that other explanation, the one that's harder to shake off. What if they really did go south? What if Antarctica wasn't just a hiding place, but something else entirely? Some versions say the Nazis discovered ancient ruins beneath the ice, remnants of a lost civilization far older than humanity. They supposedly found technology, or knowledge, that defied understanding. And when the war turned against them, they retreated there, burrowing into the frozen mountains, building a refuge that history itself couldn't reach. It's poetic, in a grim way. A dying empire seeking immortality in the coldest place on Earth. Then comes the twist that ties it all together, Operation High Jump. In the 1940s, when Admiral Byrd led his massive expedition, the one that ended too soon, some theorists say he wasn't just testing equipment. He was hunting ghosts. Or more precisely, hunting Nazis. According to that version, the American fleet encountered something unexpected, resistance. Not from humans, exactly. Something faster, smarter, more advanced. You can almost picture it. Planes screaming over the ice, radar scrambling, the sky alive with the impossible. Of course, there's no proof. No photos. No documents. Just silence, and that's what makes it powerful. Because silence is where imagination thrives. And Antarctica has been silent for a very long time. Maybe there was no base. Maybe there was. Maybe it's still there, sealed under miles of ice, the machinery long dead, the corridors frozen in time. You wonder what it would look like. A cold metal labyrinth, flickering lights still trapped beneath the glacier, a monument to human obsession and arrogance. Or maybe it's just rock. Just ice. Just stories told by people who stared at maps too long and found patterns where there were none. But here's the thing. The idea of Base 211 isn't really about Nazis. It's about fear. Fear that history isn't as linear as we pretend. Fear that civilizations rise and fall in cycles we've forgotten. Fear that the past is still buried under the snow, watching, waiting. And if that's true, then maybe the Nazis weren't the first to look for something beneath Antarctica. Maybe they were just the latest visitors. Somewhere in a museum in Istanbul lies a piece of leather that shouldn't exist. It's small, torn, faded, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. And depending on who you ask, it's either one of history's greatest cartographic achievements, or one of its most inconvenient mysteries. On the surface, it's just a map, hand-inked, decorated with sea monsters and poetic notes in Old Turkish script. It shows parts of Europe, Africa, and South America. So far, So normal. But then your eyes drift to the bottom edge, and there, beneath the curl of the parchment, something strange appears. A long, sweeping coastline, shaped almost exactly like the northern shore of Antarctica. Except there's a problem. Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820. And in 1513, it was supposed to be frozen under 2 miles of ice. So how did a 16th century admiral know it was there? And worse, how did he draw it without the ice? Pyre Rees claimed his map was based on older source charts, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He said he compiled them, fragments of knowledge gathered from long-lost explorers, travelers, and ancient kings of the sea. It sounds poetic, until you realize he might have been serious. Because when modern researchers compared that lower section to seismic surveys, maps of Antarctica's bedrock, made with radar in the 20th century, the resemblance was unsettling. Mountains, bays, features no human had ever seen in 1513. You stare at it, tracing the lines. The resemblance is rough, but there's just enough to make your rational brain uncomfortable. Maybe coincidence, maybe intuition, or maybe memory. Some historians wave it away, of course. Misinterpretation, they say. It's just South America drawn too far east. Fair enough, except the curvature doesn't match, and the inscriptions explicitly label the southern landmass as something separate. Pyre Rees even wrote a note beside it. This land is said to be very hot. Not cold. That's when the theory begins to melt through the ice. Perhaps Antarctica wasn't always frozen. Perhaps, thousands of years ago, it was a different world, temperate, green, and known to someone who mapped it before history began keeping score. Congrats, you've just stepped into one of the quietest rebellions in historical thinking. The idea that advanced map makers existed long before our textbooks allow. Of course, mainstream scholars insist there's nothing supernatural about it. They'll tell you continental drift, bad math, and artistic license explain everything. Maybe they're right, but you can't ignore how many other ancient maps, Orontius Phineas, Boach, Mercator's lesser-known sketches, all hinted at a southern continent that shouldn't have been known. It's as if someone, somewhere, once saw the Earth from above, and we're just finding their notes. You imagine it, an ancient civilization sailing vast oceans, charting coastlines before ice swallowed them. Maybe they passed fragments of their knowledge through Egyptians, Greeks, and later through Arabic and Ottoman scholars. A whisper of a memory preserved on calfskin. And then silence. Forgetting. Until one day, a man named Pyre Rees stitched it all together, and accidentally left a fingerprint of a world that no longer exists. Spoiler alert, scientists hate that idea, because it means our timeline would need rewriting. And rewriting history is a messy business, especially when it suggests we're not the first advanced species to hold a globe and wonder what lies beneath. But whether it's proof or coincidence, the map remains what it's always been, a quiet contradiction, a piece of leather that refuses to behave. You picture it under glass, the ink cracked, the edges darkened by centuries of human breath. The curator calls it a marvel of early navigation. You call it something else. A message in a bottle from a world we no longer remember. So you stand there, staring at the lines that shouldn't exist, feeling the same uneasy curiosity that has followed every explorer since the beginning. If they mapped Antarctica before the ice, what else did they see? And what did they leave behind, waiting for us to notice? You've seen the satellite images, endless white, swirling storms, a land that looks more like another planet than part of Earth. It's hard to imagine anything ever living there. But once upon a time, and that phrase isn't poetic, it's literal, Antarctica was green. Not a little less icy. Not occasional moss. Forests, rivers. Dinosaurs wading through ferns taller than your house. It's strange to picture, isn't it? The same continent that can kill you in 10 minutes of exposure once had crocodiles basking in sunlight. Fossilized tree trunks lie buried beneath the ice, frozen time capsules from a world that shouldn't have existed down here. That was about 90 million years ago, give or take. But the real twist comes later, because long after the dinosaurs died, long after continents drifted apart, Antarctica stayed surprisingly warm, for longer than it should have. Evidence shows that as recently as 12,000 years ago, a blink in geological time, large parts of its coastline may have been free of ice. Some scientists think the Ross Sea region had open water. Others think vast areas were tundra, not glacier. And 12,000 years ago just happens to be the same time humanity was figuring out how to farm. It's an inconvenient overlap. Because if there were humans around when Antarctica was still partially ice-free, who's to say they never set foot there? You can almost hear the textbooks sighing. They hate that question. Mainstream science says no, there's no evidence of human habitation. And they're right. No tools, no bones, no carvings. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially when the evidence is buried under 2 miles of solid ice. You think of those radar scans, the ones that show geometric formations deep beneath the surface, the ridges and right angles that geologists insist are natural. Maybe they are. But nature doesn't always color inside the lines. And then you remember the Piri Reis map, the one that showed Antarctica without ice. What if it wasn't a lucky guess? What if it was a memory passed down from a time when Antarctica wasn't a death sentence? Theories bloom like frost on glass. Maybe it was Atlantis. Maybe it was something older, something that didn't even call itself human. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, and sometimes they sink quietly beneath the weight of their own arrogance or their own glaciers. The Earth is forgetful like that. It buries its secrets under mud, ash, and ice, and then waits patiently for someone to ask the wrong question. Congrats. That someone is you. But let's stay grounded at least for a moment. There's real science beneath the myths. Ice cores pulled from Antarctica's depths show patterns of carbon, pollen, and spores, traces of a lush, temperate world. Once, broadleaf trees covered the coasts. There were insects, flowers, and freshwater lakes. It was a paradise of a kind, until the axis shifted, the temperatures dropped, and the slow, grinding creep of ice began. Over millions of years, forests turned to fossils, rivers froze mid-course, and everything living was sealed away. The continent became the Earth's hard drive, overwriting the past one frozen layer at a time. Today, the ice keeps it all in perfect storage. Every snowfall adds another year to the record. Every melt reveals a memory. And every radar scan that pierces deeper than before shows that maybe, just maybe, something survived the burial. If there was ever a civilization there, it would be crushed flat now. Cities turn to silt, monuments to dust. But ruins don't need to be visible to exist. Sometimes, the absence of noise is its own kind of evidence. You close your eyes and imagine it, a city glowing faintly under miles of translucent blue. Towers of stone and glass caught in eternal frost. The sunlight above never reaches it, but maybe it still waits. And when the ice melts, as it inevitably will, maybe the past won't stay buried much longer. Because the world before ice might not be gone. It might just be sleeping. If you think Antarctica is nothing but dead ice, you're wrong. It's alive, just not in ways you'd expect. Beneath the continent's frozen skin, under layers so thick they could swallow mountains, there are lakes. Thousands of them. Moving, shifting, whispering beneath the cold. The most famous of these is Lake Vostok. It sits 2 miles below the surface, trapped under ice older than civilization itself. For millions of years, it's been sealed off. No sunlight, no air, no contact with the outside world. And somehow, it's still liquid. Scientists say it stays that way because of pressure and geothermal heat. That sounds comforting until you realize that what they're really saying is, we don't fully understand it. Which is science's polite way of admitting they're a little creeped out too. When Russian researchers drilled down to sample it, they took every precaution imaginable: decontamination, sterile equipment, sealed chambers. Then in 2012, after years of drilling, they finally reached the water. And that's when the strangeness began. The samples that came up contained microbes, tiny life forms that didn't match anything else on Earth. Some said contamination. Others said discovery. The official statement? Inconclusive. The unofficial feeling? Unease. Congrats, you've just met the kind of mystery that keeps scientists awake at night. Lake Vostok isn't alone. There are hundreds of subglacial lakes beneath Antarctica. They flow through hidden channels, some connected, some isolated for millions of years. Imagine rivers of black, pressurized water running through total darkness. A network beneath the ice like veins under skin. But it's not the water that bothers people most. It's what radar has seen down there. Back in the 1990s, and again in the 2000s, high-resolution radar scans picked up something under the ice near certain mountain ranges, geometric patterns. Straight lines. Angles. Rectangular voids that didn't belong in nature's usual chaos. Official explanations came quickly. Glacial formations. Bedrock fractures. Data artifacts. Of course, that's what you'd say too if your billion-dollar research project just found something that looked suspiciously like a buried structure. You zoom in on the coordinates using Google Earth, because that's what everyone does. You don't find much, just faint outlines. Perfectly symmetrical in a place where nothing should be. Maybe it's your imagination. Maybe it's not. Some of the supposed anomalies line up with magnetic disturbances, areas where compasses behave badly, where sensors glitch, where satellites record inconsistent readings. Scientists attribute it to natural minerals or volcanic activity. But it's hard not to wonder, if there were ruins under 2 miles of ice, what would they look like on radar? Probably like this. And then there's the Wilkes Land anomaly, a massive, circular magnetic feature under East Antarctica, over 150 miles wide. Discovered in 2006, it's been described as an impact crater, a mantle upwelling, and occasionally, something artificial. No one knows for sure. The last option doesn't make it into press releases, but it makes it into whispers. Some theorists call it the Antarctic Dome. Others say it's the top of something much larger, a buried complex or city, entombed by ice long before humans learned how to forget. Spoiler alert, no one's allowed to dig there. The treaty says so. You picture the scene. Miles of empty snow. No life, no sound but wind. Underneath, an entire lake, an ancient anomaly, and maybe, just maybe, the bones of something we don't have a word for yet. It's poetic, in a bleak way. The last great secret hiding where no one can reach it, preserved by the cold, protected by bureaucracy. Antarctica doesn't need walls. The ice does the job. And if there is something beneath it all, an ancient ruin, a machine, or even just a pattern nature forgot to explain, it will stay there, waiting. Because the truth about Antarctica isn't that it's empty. It's that it's occupied. Just not by us. It always starts innocently enough. You open Google Earth, tilt the globe, scroll down past the equator, and keep spinning. The continents fade, the blue deepens, and suddenly you're looking at a place that doesn't quite feel real. Antarctica. White, cracked, featureless. You zoom in. And then, you notice it. Blurs. Smudges. Perfectly square patches of missing pixels. Most people scroll past them. You don't. You keep zooming, frame by frame, until the shapes start to make sense, or maybe refuse to make sense. Some are rectangular, like airstrips. Some are blacked out circles, as if someone took a digital marker to the snow. Others are strangely geometric, too precise, too deliberate. The official story is simple: data stitching errors, satellite overlap issues, incomplete mapping. Fair enough. Except the same problem doesn't seem to happen over Kansas. You pick one set of coordinates, let's say 66 degrees 36 minutes 12.58 s, 99 degrees 43 minutes 12.72 e. There, you find what looks like a shadowed opening in the ice. Roughly 100 meters wide. Perfectly oval. Too clean to be natural, too specific to be random. The internet called it the Antarctic entrance. Scientists, of course, had explanations ready. A collapsed ice cave, they said. A trick of light. The kind of trick that keeps showing up in the same place, every year, on every update. Congrats, you found yourself deep in forbidden coordinate territory, where curiosity goes to die of frostbite. And the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Entire swaths of coastline have image resolutions that never improve. No matter how advanced the satellite, how crisp the update, Antarctica remains stubbornly low-res. Like the pixels themselves are classified. Other places the imagery exists, but it's dated. Some tiles are 20 years old. No new data. As if the continent hasn't changed since 2003. The irony? Antarctica changes all the time. Ice shifts. Cracks form. Glaciers move miles per year. Yet somehow, the same satellite errors keep covering the same coordinates. You start comparing map layers, Google, Bing, NASA's Earth data. Sometimes they don't match. Sometimes, one shows terrain where another shows blur. It's like watching two people lie about the same story and forgetting the details. When users post these anomalies online, forums, Reddit, YouTube, they get flooded with explanations. Geological illusions, pixel artifacts, cloud shadows, or the most common response of all, that's been debunked. You'll notice that word gets used a lot whenever someone gets too close to something inconvenient. Then there's the missing data zones, huge stretches marked as cloud cover, even though the same areas haven't seen a cloud in decades. And occasionally, you'll find something worse, coordinates that redirect. Try to zoom in, and the map nudges you away. Not an error, an algorithmic choice. You sit there, staring at a blank white square that looks like nothing, but feels like censorship. Of course, the rational part of your mind reminds you that satellites prioritize populated regions, not empty continents. That there's no grand conspiracy, just limited funding. That Antarctica's hard to photograph because of glare, weather, and orbital paths. That's what you tell yourself. And it's probably true. But still, it's strange, isn't it? How the coldest, deadest place on Earth just happens to be the one we see the least clearly. How the data gaps just happen to sit over the same anomalous regions. How images just happen to glitch where rumors of structures, domes, and openings circulate. It's almost poetic, a digital silence mirroring the physical one. Even our satellites keep secrets now. You close the laptop. Your reflection stares back at you in the dark screen. You tell yourself it's just coincidence, compression, data loss, snow glare. But deep down, you can't shake the feeling that the blurs aren't hiding mistakes. They're hiding history. And in a world where we can see every street corner from space, the one place still pixelated is the one no one's supposed to explore. You've probably heard the phrase, the compass doesn't work at the poles. It sounds like a fun bit of trivia. Until you realize that's not entirely true. The compass does work. It just refuses to tell you what you want to know. In Antarctica, north and south stop meaning anything. The needle trembles, wanders, points sideways, loops like it's drunk on magnetism. And as you stand there, surrounded by a horizon of white, you realize the ground itself is messing with your sense of direction. It's a good metaphor for this place, the continent that doesn't want to be mapped. Expeditions have reported magnetic disturbances here for over a century. Instruments that go haywire for no reason. GPS systems that suddenly need recalibration. Sometimes, compasses spin continuously. Other times, they just stop moving. Officially, it's all about magnetic declination, the slow drift of Earth's magnetic poles. Scientifically sound. But then you start hearing stories about localized distortions. Spots where compasses act like there's something beneath them. Something big, metallic, and very much not natural. Congrats. You've stumbled into the whispering ice zone. No, that's not an official name. It's what the few who've been there call it. Because sometimes, when the wind dies and the static builds, you can actually hear it, faint hums under the ice. Low, rhythmic, mechanical. Seismologists blame ice friction and subglacial water flow. Fair enough. But the pattern is too regular, too deliberate. Like machinery buried and still running millennia later. Some explorers report strange sensations, like standing above an engine. A pulsing beneath the feet, as if the ice itself is breathing. They describe it as a hum in the bones, not the ears. And then there's the magnetometers. Certain regions spike with energy readings far beyond expected levels, as if huge metallic masses lie frozen beneath the ice sheets. NASA maps show anomalous signatures under the Wilkes Land crater, a depression nearly 300 miles wide. Scientists call it a probable asteroid impact site. Alternative historians call it something else, the buried remains of an ancient complex. One theory says it's an underground power source, something that once harnessed geothermal energy. Another says it's a defense system, shut down long ago. And one particularly imaginative researcher described it as the beating heart of an old civilization that froze mid-pulse. Poetic, if nothing else. The truth, as usual, is more complicated and less comforting, because even modern equipment can't fully explain the irregular fields. And electromagnetic interference isn't supposed to occur on a continent of rock and ice. Some say it's due to high concentrations of iron or nickel beneath the crust. Others suspect that something metallic, something massive, lies there. Maybe the remains of a meteor. Maybe something that fell long before we started keeping track of what falls from the sky. You wonder what it would feel like to stand above that buried force. Would you feel the vibration in your chest? Would your phone glitch? Would your thoughts start to wander in directions you can't quite control? There are reports of people getting disoriented near those zones. Not lost, exactly, but unanchored. Time feels strange. Distances feel wrong. A sense that something enormous is just beneath you, sleeping. Magnetic anomalies, says the scientist. Residual energy, says the theorist. Whispering ice, says the man who went there and swears he heard it breathe. And really, who are you going to believe? The one with equations, or the one who came back trembling and half convinced he'd felt the world's heart beating under the snow? You close your laptop again. Somewhere on the internet, another video autoplays, a researcher talking about ancient power grids, ley lines, planetary harmonics. You smirk, roll your eyes, and then notice your compass app flicker for half a second before freezing. It's probably nothing. Or maybe the ice just whispered your name. You know what's strange? For a place with nothing on it, Antarctica sure has a lot of rules. No one owns it, they say. But also, no one can touch it, visit it freely, mine it, build on it, or dig too deep. Funny how free to all always means restricted to most. Welcome to the Antarctic Treaty System, humanity's most polite locked door. Signed in 1959 by 12 countries, the treaty was meant to prevent military use of the continent and promote peaceful scientific cooperation. A noble goal, until you realize that peaceful mostly means classified, and scientific cooperation means you're not invited. More than 60 nations have signed on now. The result, an entire continent sealed behind layers of bureaucracy thicker than its glaciers. Officially, the treaty prohibits any new claims or resource exploitation. Unofficially, it just ensures no one goes snooping without permission. Even today, access is tightly regulated. Want to go? Great. Fill out a few dozen forms, get government clearance, and prepare to be watched like a penguin with a pickaxe. Congrats. You live in a world where climbing Everest requires courage, but stepping foot too far inland in Antarctica requires clearance codes. You might think it's for environmental protection. And yes, that's part of it. But there's something unsettling about how absolute the silence is. No commercial flights. No private exploration beyond designated routes. No drilling deeper than a few meters without international oversight. And somehow, satellites still can't seem to show us the good parts. It's as if the world's most powerful nations collectively agreed on one thing: don't look too closely. Now, let's talk about the bases, those tidy color-coded dots on the map. You've got McMurdo, US, Vostok, Russia, Concordia, France, Italy, and a handful of others. Each has its own scientific focus. Meteorology, ice core sampling, astrobiology, but none are anywhere near the so-called anomalous zones. It's almost impressive, the consistency with which these research stations avoid curiosity. And then there's the restricted zones. Yes, those exist. Areas marked off-limits due to environmental sensitivity or safety concerns. Which, to be fair, makes sense. But if you happen to compare their coordinates with satellite anomalies and magnetic hotspots, well, the overlap is interesting. Of course, the treaty's defenders say that's pure coincidence. That secrecy is necessary to preserve the pristine ecosystem. that humans can't be trusted not to ruin it. Which is adorable, considering how enthusiastically we ruin everything else. Then there's the inspections, or lack thereof. Nations are allowed to inspect each other's bases at any time. Except any time usually means once every few decades, and inspection usually means polite tea visit. So much for transparency. Even the supply routes are odd. Nearly every major base receives shipments from outside, but all by pre-approved channels, all coordinated under the treaty's supervision. In other words, if something were being shipped in or out that wasn't on the manifest, who would notice? No one. Because Antarctica isn't really a place anymore. It's a protocol. People online call the treaty the world's strangest peace pact. Think about it. Dozens of nations who can't agree on anything else somehow maintaining perfect harmony over a continent of ice and secrecy for more than 60 years. No wars. No territorial disputes. No development. Just silence. Almost too perfect. You might ask yourself why. Why does this barren, frozen desert get such protection? Why not the Amazon or the oceans or literally anywhere else? Maybe it's because Antarctica is unique. Or maybe it's because something under the ice is. Whatever the case, the gatekeepers have done their job well. They built a wall of laws instead of bricks. They turned curiosity into contraband. And so the continent sleeps, untouched, unseen, unclaimed. While somewhere beneath, the ice hums, the compasses twitch, and a few redacted documents sit in filing cabinets that no one's supposed to open. Officially, it's all about peace. Unofficially, it's about quiet. And quiet, as you've learned, is rarely innocent. You stand at the edge of the world, staring at white that never ends. No trees, no sound, no horizon, just an ocean of frozen time. And beneath your feet, a history no one remembers. This is the part they don't show on maps. The buried chapters. Miles below the ice, entire mountain ranges twist like sleeping beasts. Rivers flow in secret, lakes glow in darkness, and maybe, if you believe the whispers, something else stirs down there too. You start to think of the ice not as a barrier, but as a library. Every layer a page, pressed and frozen, recording what the planet has tried to forget. Most people imagine Antarctica as static, eternal cold, endless silence. But that's a lie of convenience. It wasn't always this way. Once it was green. Satellite scans show riverbeds, deltas, fossilized forests, even pollen traces that shouldn't exist this far south. They speak of a continent that once saw rain, sunlight, perhaps even civilization. And when the ice came, it sealed everything under glass. Think about that. If humanity's timeline is wrong by even a few thousand years, what else could be missing? Cities drowned under seas. Cultures erased by dust. Or maybe the echoes of a civilization that was here before we had a word for civilization. Some theorists say the ice hides memory. That within the trapped air bubbles and frozen layers are signals, chemical fingerprints, maybe even artifacts. Others go further. They call it the last archive of a forgotten world. But no one's allowed to look too deeply, are they? Every time an expedition drills, there's a malfunction. Every time a deep scan gets too detailed, the data goes missing. The scientists smile politely and talk about funding issues. You wonder if they even want to know. Because knowing changes everything. Imagine what would happen if we confirmed that history isn't linear, that civilization has risen and fallen more than once. Imagine realizing we might not be the first to stare at the stars and think we were alone. And then imagine that proof of that idea has been quietly freezing for tens of thousands of years, waiting for someone with the wrong kind of curiosity to dig it up. The ice has patience. It waits. And it keeps secrets better than any government. You walk through that thought for a while, the cold biting at the edge of your imagination. Somewhere, a satellite passes overhead, its lens catching a glint of light where there shouldn't be any. Just another pixel, another glitch, another thing to explain away. But you know better now. Every silence has a shape. Every blur hides a story. Maybe what's beneath Antarctica isn't a ruin or a machine or a city. Maybe it's just evidence of something ancient, something cyclical. Maybe it's proof that forgetting is part of survival. After all, every empire falls. Every fire burns out. And the ice? It just covers the ashes, presses down, and waits for someone new to start asking questions again. You look out across the endless white and realize how small you are. How temporary. How human. They'll tell you Antarctica is empty. That it's just ice and rock and cold. But emptiness is never really empty. It's a space waiting to be filled or remembered. Maybe that's what draws people to these stories. Not the aliens or the ancient machines or the hidden civilizations, but the possibility that the world still holds something unknown. That there are still places untouched by certainty. You close your eyes. The wind moans across the ice, slow, deep, almost like a voice. It says nothing you can understand, but you feel it anyway. A low vibration that hums in your bones. It feels like history breathing. You take one last look at the blank horizon. And for a moment, you imagine it thawing. The ice dripping away, revealing stone, structure, memory. The truth, gleaming in the sunlight, too bright to stare at for long. Then you blink, and it's gone. Just snow again. Just silence. Just the frozen library, keeping its secrets for another 1,000 years. And you, standing there, are suddenly very aware of how small your footprints look before the wind erases them.